today we need to talk. We're setting aside mental health breaks clearly, and we need to talk about the Christian nationalists' agenda to control all sexual and reproductive activity of American women. And I say American women because really none of this applies to men. Because if men fall off the Christian nationalist train and do anything inappropriate, it's our fault anyway. So
right.
It's really all about it's all about us. So you wrote a Substack about that the Christian nationalists are coming for contraception.
Yes. And that has
Illicit.
been a long-standing goal of the Christian nationalist movement. If you're Catholic in this group, you know that Catholics have always said that people shouldn't use contraception. But I grew up in a Baptist church in the South, and my church, my mother taught me when I was a teenager that contraception, the birth control pill, caused abortions. So this indoctrination in the Christian nationalist community that all contraception for women causes abortions is something that is a deep-seated now, long-standing view in that world, that all contraception should be outlawed because it prevents a human embryo, once an egg is fertilized, from implanting. And that fertilized embryo, even though it hasn't implanted, is still a tiny human being to them.
And
so
that
they
is
believe
how some contraception works, but that is not how all contraception works. But they lump everything into they're really hot to go after Plan B,
yes,
which is also known as the morning after pill, which does not do that. It does not stop. It doesn't end a pregnancy if it's occurred.
it prevents one from happening.
Yes,
But if
also wrong.
you look at some of these far right abortion websites, they have a list of things on them that they consider to be abortifacients, and the birth control pill, Norplant, NuvaRings, all of those things are on there. So they believe that any contraception that alters the climate of the uterus and the woman's body such that it makes it more hostile to becoming pregnant is also an abortifacient, even though it might not be causing an abortion directly. That has repercussions now. Last week, Jessica Valenti at Abortion Every Day wrote about an Alliance Defending Freedom case where they've submitted an argument that essentially would allow them to ban all contraception nationwide and some kind of backdoor ban. By the wording of it, they used a legal term called inter alia to refer to contraception in the writing. And so I wrote about this on Monday because journalists like Jessica don't feel comfortable, for whatever reason, calling out the Christian extremism and the Christian nationalism behind these kinds of cases. And to me, abortion bans and anything that tries to control people's bodies and bedrooms and what they're doing in private with their bodies between consenting adults is all forcing other people's religious beliefs on you and forcing you to live by someone's interpretation of a faith document that maybe you don't even read or believe. And that's what I believe abortion bans are. And that's certainly what these contraception bans, should they make them happen, would be. So that's why we're talking about that today.
I know I ask you to do this a lot, but I'm going to ask you to square another circle for me, because there's just so much that so much doctrine that conflicts with the doctrine within Christian nationalism that I find it very confusing. And so here's another thing. Women are supposed to submit to their husbands whenever, however frequently, whether they feel like it or not, sexually, all the time. How does that jibe with sex is only for procreation, and so unless wouldn't couples need to be using the tracking cycles all the time to make sure they're not accidentally having sex when you can't possibly become pregnant? And do Christian nationalists stop having sex during pregnancies? And do they also stop having sex when a woman is peri or postmenopausal?
Okay. This is a great question. We can make so many men's heads blow off with these answers. So who are here. So that's great.
Get ready, guys. Ready your heads.
So extreme Christian nationalists, and we've talked about the doctrine of original sin here before that came from St. Augustine, who was a sex addict. The reason he became a priest was because he was a sex addict. And so he thought that if he became a priest and wrote this whole doctrine of original sin and blamed women for why he couldn't stop having sex, that then, he would stop having sex. And so and this filtered down into multiple faiths as a result of this almost 2,000 years ago now, man who could not control himself. So he decided to blame other people for the fact that he couldn't control himself, namely women. So another part of those beliefs are, in the extreme camp in Christian nationalism, that the only time sex is appropriate is for procreation, that sex is an act that is designed to make more babies, and therefore you should only be doing it when it's possible to make more babies. It is a dirty act otherwise. It is dirty and wrong, and you should not have it for pleasure ever, ever, ever.
Right. It was, I guess, just an accident that in the grand design, God's grand design of humans, that sex was made pleasurable, because there's really no purpose for that.
Sure, they'd say that prior to Eve committing the original sin,
Right.
he could enjoy sex. But
Damn you,
Eve did that, now nobody can really enjoy it anymore. I'm sure that's something like what they'd say. That sounds like them. So because of that, that's one reason if you listen to Catholics talk, or in my church growing up, masturbation was frowned upon, because even the wasting of seed was considered to be an act that could, was denying us more potential human beings, and you should not be wasting that substance in that manner. Also, your body is God's temple, and you should not be making God have sex with your body. So that is how they say. I'm glad we can laugh. But, it really is that extreme in some of these churches. So therefore, people shouldn't be having sex when they're pregnant. They shouldn't be having sex at times in their cycles when they can't get pregnant. That's one reason. That's really the reason for fertility awareness-based methods, which is the only method of contraception that Project 2025 endorsed. And it was that section of Project 2025 was written by Roger Severino. Roger Severino directed the Department of Health and Human Services in the first regime. And I mean, in some ways, it's horrible to say I wish he were still there, because what we've got now is so much level more awful. But he is an Opus Dei Catholic, radicalized extremist. And so he put these very radicalized Catholic views about abortion and contraception into this document. And so fertility awareness-based methods is really another name for the Catholic rhythm method, the temperature method, and the cervical mucus method that they recommend for their congregations to use, really to detect when they're ovulating. so that they can
Right.
then
Not
have
to
sex
figure
and
out
get
when you
pregnant.
can safely have sex without getting pregnant. It's the opposite of
Right.
that.
So that's really the only method that Project 2025 endorsed. The regime has now given federal funding toward monies for that method to promote that method in the United States. So they're making very clear signals that they're wanting to start restricting contraception. And I want to state, a lot of people won't go this far, but I have always gone as far as to say they want to outlaw all contraception up to and including the birth control pill. This isn't just about abortion medication. It's not just about Plan B, an emergency contraception. It is about all contraception. They don't want any of it to be available because they believe any contraception causes abortion.
And it is standard protocol right now that when a woman, if a woman does report a sexual assault or rape, and she goes to the hospital and has a rape kit done to gather evidence, or just goes and reports it all, she is offered Plan B to make sure that she does not become pregnant with her rapist child. That would be gone.
Well,
Rape,
in certain red
incest.
states, it's probably already gone. I don't know that they offer it now in a state like Iowa or Oklahoma or Texas. So that would expand to a nationwide protocol that the federal government would enforce with their new Gestapo to make people not be able to get that kind of care in the wake of an assault like that. So, because the extremists in this camp, let's go back to last year to the Missouri state representative who said forced birth can be the greatest healing agent. And, they truly believe that even pregnancies that result from rape and incest should not be ended. And that women have so much to learn from that trial that God gives them. And it's a healing agent between her and God. So, they would even ban those therapies for people, even children who have been through something as horrific as a rape or a sexual assault.
It is horrific, and that includes incest, which
Yes.
we talk about as a different category, but when the victim is a minor, it's rape, and very often it's rape even when the victim has come of legal age.
Yes.
So we have another person we need to talk about today, which is Kevin Roberts. Tell
Yes.
us who this lovely gentleman is.
So Kevin Roberts is the head and the president of the Heritage Foundation. He is the man who last year got up in front of a group of people and said the Second American Revolution will be bloodless if the left allows it to be, which I interpreted then, I said it all the time, as if you resist, we will kill you. So when I say his name now, it's Kevin, if you resist, we will kill you. Robert. So
I shouldn't laugh at that, but
yeah. So he's at it again. Last week he got up at an event, a conservative event in Indiana, and talked about occupying and taking over blue state capitals and making them not the state capital in a forced manner where Republicans should go in and occupy these blue state capitals to force their beliefs, these minority fascist beliefs, on a blue state that has duly elected blue state representatives. He said that last week at an event. He used the term Second American Revolution. We're in the process of having a Second American Revolution right now, and this is part of that. We need to be going into these cities and we need to be ousting all these people and installing the kinds of people we want. So it's no surprise to me that in the wake of that statement, we see what's happening in Texas now with the regime and Greg Abbott collaborating to rig the 2026 midterms in favor of Republicans. This is a direct result of Heritage Foundation talking points and planning. This is one of the clearest examples. I mean, there's so many because the Heritage Foundation authored Project 2025, for those of you who don't know that. But this is one of the clearest and most direct examples of Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, says something. Not even 48 hours later, they're hatching this plan to gerrymander Texas again in the middle of a cycle when it's illegal to do that. And now they're talking about ousting these duly elected representatives, sending the FBI after them, arresting them. And so this is a clear through line to what Kevin Roberts said just last week in Indiana.
Yeah, Greg Abbott has now requested that the head of Democrats in Texas, who is, I guess, the one he's decided is completely responsible for Democrats leaving the state, so they can't have a quorum and they can't move forward with this redistricting plan to steal seats from elected Democrats. He has asked that he be removed from office.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and if the Texas Supreme Court rubber stamps that, it will go to the Supreme Corrupt Court, which, who knows? I could totally see them saying, well, that's a state issue. We don't need to get involved in that. And letting a Texas Supreme Court ruling stand. So then that gives them legal precedent to remove all the rest of these representatives.
And the other tactic that Roberts was talking about doing was within states. I believe he specifically mentioned Austin and Nashville, Democratic controlled cities. They elected Democratic mayors of those cities. And so his plan you don't actually have to remove someone who's been elected. You can change the status of a city. So it's not a city any longer. And then the mayor doesn't have any power because he was the mayor of a city.
That's what they did in Nashville already. So Tennessee is a perfect example of where this fascism can lead. It's already a much more fascist area of the country in terms of government than a lot of the rest of the country is. They've been using Tennessee as a petri dish for these ideas for a long time. And so they've already neutered Nashville, which is a blue dot in a very red state. And they've used these tactics to do that, of stripping city council of its power, stripping the mayor of its power, of trying to draw through the city so that the individual pieces of it can be as gerrymandered as possible to rule out having more blue representatives. So they already have their playbook for doing this from a place like Nashville. They also did something similar, but not removing the power of the state government in Asheville, North Carolina. So Asheville, if you haven't been there, I'm sorry, I'm Southern. I call these places Nashville, but it's it is a very, very blue dot in Western North Carolina and a very crunchy, fun, amazing place to go.
Yes, it is.
And so, but they divided that city up the same way, such that it was impossible to elect a Democrat, even though the city is very, very blue as a voting bloc.
We haven't talked about this in a while, but another little nugget in Project 2025 was or is, and I'm sure there is a plan to implement this because they're implementing everything else that they can possibly do in that blueprint that Trump pretended he didn't know anything about. The the other way that they can approach neutering these local and city governments is that they would like it that you do not have to be a Christian to get elected. I think this is probably only a step along a continuum where eventually, yes, you will need to be, you will have to have declared Jesus as your Lord and Savior to be able to get on the ballot.
Convincingly.
Yes.
Convincingly.
But so you can be a non-Christian and hold office, but you will need to govern by the belief system of Christian nationalists. So even if that belief system is completely counter, well, first of all, it's at the most basic level, the commingling of church and state, where state's just gone and it's just church, but also forcing an elected official to not really, it really doesn't matter what you run on. If you are allowed to be removed from office, if you are not enforcing the doctrine of Christian nationalism. And they would like it to be possible to remove someone from office if they do not enforce Christian nationalist law versus secular law.
So Russell Vought, who's the head of the Office of Management and Budget, again, highly, highly radicalized Christian nationalist extremist fanatic, very intelligent person. Don't want to make it sound like he's not extremely intelligent and very, very capable of doing a lot of really bad things very, very effectively, because he's behind a lot of what's happening right now. When people look at the president and say he'll never be able to accomplish that, of course he wouldn't, but he's got people behind him who are very capable and who are accomplishing a lot. And Vought is one of those people. So Vought's on the record as saying that this should be a Christian nationalist Christian nation, and that only Christian nationalists should be serving in government, either as elected officials or working in government. That's part of their loyalty tests and their vetting of people right now, is you're going to have to be a Christian nationalist to keep your job or to have a job. That we talked about Pete Hegseth's, prayer breakfast at the Pentagon. That's one of the ways they weed out people and find out who will go along with this Christian nationalist takeover and who won't, so that they can eventually get rid of them. So in all branches of Christian nationalism, they have their manifesto about what they believe they should be able to do as Christian nationalists with government. And I'm writing about this tomorrow, so come to my Substack tomorrow. One of the key tenets, whatever branch of it you're in, is that since human beings were created by God, we are subject to God's law. And it doesn't matter whether we believe in God or not, Christian nationalist interpretation of the Bible God. It doesn't matter. God is still God, and we are all still required to follow God's law as they interpret it. So one of the pieces of all of their manifestos is that it is their charge as Christian nationalists to come into government, to take over government, and to make secular laws match their interpretation of Christian nationalist law, their interpretation of God's law. That's an abortion ban is an example of that. Yes, it's misogyny. Yes, it's patriarchy, but it's forcing other people's religion on you, forcing you to live by religion that you maybe don't follow.
It sounds remarkably like the Taliban.
It is exactly like the Taliban, and I don't mean to offend anyone here who's Muslim. Islam is a beautiful, peaceful religion.
Yes, Islam and what the Taliban, not the same thing.
Is an extreme, radicalized version of it, just like Christian nationalism is an extreme, radicalized version of Christianity. So, that's what they would like to do with everything. And there's even a group of white men within this extreme version of Christian nationalism. It's all extreme, who believe that we need to apply biblical punishments from the Old Testament. Stoning people to death publicly,
That's a
if someone
deterrent.
steals, cutting off the offending limb. If you harm someone and put out their eye, for instance, then your punishment should be that you get your eye put out. And you can go online and find videos of these white dudes sitting around talking about what a great, glorious utopia it would be if we could just bring back biblical punishments and apply them to everyone.
Because it was such a utopia when that was actually happening. It's not like and still happens in certain countries.
That's an extreme version of where this could go.
Yeah.
But for them to try to eliminate the wall between church and state, which they're doing, and to make all of our national laws match their interpretation of the Bible is something that they're very much doing. They're doing it in red states. They've been doing it in red states. I mean, Missouri, if you live in Missouri, is very much an example of this. Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, much of the South is now an example of this. So Idaho is another example of this. So they're intent upon doing that. And they don't call it. That's another thing Kevin Roberts has said publicly. When they talk amongst themselves, they talk very differently than when they talk to the public. And I covered last year an address that he gave to a conservative group where he said we have to keep using this different language, which is what I cover all the time, for the public, because if we said the things that we say in private to the public, nobody would vote for us because we're
white supremacists say the same thing.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, he's that too, but
yeah,
so he's very much on the record as saying we have to trick people into voting for this by not talking about the religion aspect of it. And that's what they've done so well for so long. They try to make it not about religion, and then when you call it that, they scream persecution and anti-Christian bias. And we've got to get over all that and start calling this people forcing their religious beliefs on other people. And every time they do this, get up in public meetings, get individual one-on-one and in group settings and say, we do not live in a country where we force other people to live by someone's specific religious beliefs. We don't live in that country, and that's what you're proposing, and that's what this is. And we loudly and vociferously reject that. And we've got to start doing that in all of these public meetings that we go to and everywhere else that we can get that message across to people.
Yeah.
And when they say Christian persecution, say, no, you're persecuting me by trying to make me live by your religious beliefs.
Right. If you want to live by those beliefs yourself,
right,
good on you.
Have
at it. But no, that's not. We were a nation founded on religious freedom, and that is not the freedom to impose your religion on other people. It is
right.
We are supposed to be a multicultural, multi-religious,
exactly
liberal democracy.
I hope if y'all take nothing else away from today, go stock up on all the birth control pills and reproductive health care supplies and pregnancy tests. I believe they will eliminate over-the-counter pregnancy tests because that's one way that they can find out you're pregnant and track you is to make you go into an office to get a pregnancy test. So
and stop using those apps to track your cycle. Don't
use Google Calendar or any of that to do it either. So that's one thing to take away from this. If you can be pregnant, or if you care about people who can be pregnant, please do these things and talk about this and make sure that everybody's covered. That's important. And then start calling out this religious extremism everywhere. Every time they bring up a law like this, and don't call it Christian and their faith. Call it their faith and say we reject that. We are not a nation who one group of people gets to force everybody else to live by their religious beliefs. We are better than that. So those are the two things to take away from it.
Yeah, for sure. And you had a newsletter this week. The title is, or a installment of your newsletter, What Blue State Leaders Need to Do to Combat Fascism Now. Strongly encourage people to read this. It'll give you a better understanding of why living in a blue state, and we've talked about this some today, why living in a blue state does not make you safe in this type of fascist environment, and gives you a number of things that you can be pushing the elected officials, the Democratic elected officials in your state, to be doing now. Because, as you know, we've talked about with Asheville and Nashville and Austin, these things start on the local level, and
Right.
we have to be involved on the local level and not just keep our eyes focused on the midterm elections, because this is it bubbles up from the ground up, and the majority of the laws that impact your lives on a daily basis are local, municipal, state laws and not federal laws. So please pay attention to what is happening and talk to your Democratic mayors, talk to your Democratic representatives, talk to your Democratic governors, and hold their feet to the fire and insist that they be calling these things out, and all the other things in that installment of Andra's phenomenal, for such a time as this, Substack newsletter. And always please join us for these conversations with Andra. They are so, so important. Thank you, Andra, for being here again this week. I love talking with you.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to see everyone and all the hearts and all the comments. I appreciate y'all so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.